we're diving into a high-stakes Senate hearing exposing what could be one of the biggest welfare fraud schemes in Minnesota. Senators Cruz, Kennedy, and Britt are grilling witnesses, demanding accountability, and probing how billions of taxpayer dollars may have vanished. Stick around. We're breaking down the jaw-dropping scale of the fraud, the loopholes exploited, and why this matters to every American taxpayer.
Senators Ted Cruz, John Kennedy, and Katie Britt press witnesses for answers, demanding accountability and tougher safeguards to stop it from happening again. Here are the three biggest moments from the hearing. Watch it right here.
GAO has reported that the federal government loses hundreds of billions of dollars each year to fraud and improper payments, much of it in public benefit programs. Is that correct?
Yes, GAO has reported both on estimates of federal government losses due to fraud, as well as estimates of improper payments government-wide.
You may recall the infamous Leering Center, whose blacked-out windows and childless facilities have become emblematic of the public programs fraud currently plaguing Minnesota. Mr. O'Brien, when investigators encounter fraud this obvious, does it usually represent just a single isolated bad actor or the visible tip of a much larger scheme?
Here's the kicker. When investigators find fraud this blatant, it's rarely isolated. Mr. O'Brien confirms that these visible cases are just the tip of the iceberg. The breakdown in Oversight allows fraud to spread geometrically. Think about it. One sloppy sign can expose a multi-million-dollar scheme, highlighting systemic failures that have been allowed to persist unchecked. Could stronger monitoring and enforcement have prevented this? That's the question we need to ask.
Tip of a much larger scheme.
No, it's usually the visible tip of a much, much larger scheme. Fraud has a tendency not to occur in a vacuum.
In that instance, the fraud was so blatant that the owners of the business couldn't be bothered to spell the organization's name correctly on the public signage. Mr. O'Brien, does fraud of that magnitude typically persist because it's difficult to detect or because oversight and enforcement break down?
It tends to persist because oversight and enforcement break down, and it tends to spread geometrically.
The Somali fraud problem in Minnesota is not confined to child care centers. Federal prosecutors in Minnesota expect that half of the more than $18 billion spent since 2018 on 14 different Minnesota welfare programs may prove to be fraudulent. To put that figure into perspective, the amount of fraud, if confirmed, may approach the entire GDP of the nation of Somalia. Mr. Hankinson, once funds are laundered and sent overseas to fragile or corrupt
jurisdictions. To put it in perspective, federal prosecutors estimate that half of the $18 billion spent since 2018 in Minnesota welfare programs may be fraudulent. That's staggering, nearly equivalent to Somalia's entire GDP. When money leaves the country, there's virtually no chance of recovery. This isn't just a local problem, it's a national vulnerability, and the stakes couldn't be higher.
To fragile or corrupt jurisdictions. Is there any realistic prospect of recovering them?
Only if they come back and spend them.
In many respects, Minneapolis has become the Mogadishu of the Midwest. As the chairman of the Subcommittee on Federal Courts Oversight, Agency Action and Federal Rights, I'm proud to have held a hearing last week on the issue of fraud within the Minnesota Somali community and beyond. But the problem of fraud doesn't stop there, and neither does our inquiry. Our shared civic culture rests on something uniquely American, a respect for the public commons. It is clear, though, that though Minnesota opens its doors in the early 1990s to a massive number of Somali immigrants, that kindness was not reciprocated. Instead, it was exploited again and again and again, and that's simply unacceptable. Mr. Beer, can any welfare system long survive if large-scale fraud is excused and explained away rather than confronted?
No.
It would be entirely naive to assume that fraud of this magnitude simply stops.
The statistics are striking. 81% of Somali households in Minnesota receive welfare compared to 21% of non-Somali households. Food stamps, Medicaid, cash assistance, the numbers are eye-popping. Now, this isn't about targeting a community, it's about asking tough questions. When large-scale welfare fraud occurs, what does that mean for taxpayers and the integrity of public programs? It's a debate about accountability, policy, and the limits
Fraud
of
of this
oversight.
magnitude simply stopped at public program frauds. I encourage you to examine the graph behind me. What do you notice about the usage of public programs among Minnesota's Somali immigrant population? 81% of Somali households in Minnesota receive some form of welfare, compared to 21% of non-Somali households. 54% of Somali households receive food stamps, compared to 7% of non-Somali households. 73% are enrolled in Medicaid, compared to 18% of non-Somali households. And 27% receive cash assistance, compared to 6% of non-Somali households. My question to the panel, and this is my final question, is importing vast numbers of people from an impoverished nation, putting the majority of them on public welfare for years and decades at a time, and then turning a blind eye while they steal billions of dollars from the taxpayers. Is that helping America or hurting America? Each of you has a chance to answer that. Ms. Gambler.
Yes, thank you, Senator. I would just say that your question really speaks to the work that GAO has done as it relates to leading practices for managing fraud risk. We've put out a framework.
GAO's anti-fraud framework is all about prevention, controlling risk before it spirals out of control. But the hearing also underscores a critical tension. How do we balance enforcing rules with integrating new populations? Mr. Linderman's point resonates. Fraud doesn't help anyone, and proactive enforcement is key. This is where policy meets practical reality, and where missteps can cost billions.
Put out a framework for agencies that can help them better put in place processes and controls up front to prevent fraud risks, and then also have policies and practices in place to really tailor their anti-fraud activities and anti-fraud approaches.
I believe in the melting pot. I'm an immigrant, but to melt, you need heat. You've got to put heat on people to make sure they obey laws and learn how we do business in the United States.
Is that helping or hurting America? It's a simple question.
I think if we ignore fraud, we're hurting America, of course.
Okay. Mr. Linderman?
That's not in the U.S. national interest, Senator, and we know that Somalia is a high fraud country. To bring people from that country who cannot integrate into our systems is not in the U.S. national interest.
Mr. O'Brien?
I believe it was Milton Friedman who said you can have a welfare state or you can have open borders, but you can't have both.
Mr. Beer?
We can build a wall around the welfare state, and that would be a lot better for taxpayers than building a wall and keeping out all these legal immigrants who can come and
Is this helping or hurting America?
Certainly, the welfare state is a problem, but
Mr. Schwartz?
Reform it.
It is not unusual for immigrant populations to have a high degree of assistance early in after their arrival, but we are already seeing statistics that the net benefit economically of Somali presence in the United States far outweighs the cost.
So your testimony is this massive welfare usage is helping America, and the fraud is helping America?
Not the fraud. We need to go after the fraud, which makes all inexplicable the Trump administration's decision to take actions that has decimated the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota. I can't understand it. Can you understand it?
So simple question. Is this helping America or hurting America?
The Somali presence in the United States is helping America. That graph
for the Minnesota taxpayers who had $9 billion stolen from them, sir, the Minnesota taxpayers who had $9 billion stolen.
Here's a moment dripping with tension. Some argue the Minnesota fraud ultimately benefits political interests, specifically boosting Democratic voter bases while harming taxpayers. Professor Schwartz pushes back, reminding us that speaking loudly doesn't make it true. The clash isn't just about numbers, it's about ethics, political narratives, and accountability.
Taxpayers who had $9 billion stolen from them, it has not helped them, and the American taxpayers who are supporting a dependent population who are here for one reason, and that is to vote Democrat and give money to elect Democrats. And if it robs the American taxpayers and endangers our security, for our Democrat colleagues, that is a perfectly acceptable trade-off.
Speaking loudly does not make it true.
Your time has expired.
It just doesn't.
Your time has expired, Mr. Schwartz.
Professor Schwartz, you're a professor at the University of Minnesota.
Yes.
Okay. Beautiful state, by the way. Wonderful state.
It's a wonderful state.
Some people in your beautiful state went to your state Medicaid department and said, we want some taxpayer money, some being state taxpayer money, some being federal taxpayer money, to feed the poor. And these entities that did that got the money. And then they stole it. But to help cover their tracks,
The hearing pivots to prosecution, and here's a critical takeaway. Ethnicity doesn't matter when it comes to enforcing the law. From restaurants creating fictitious invoices to families mislabeling children's status, the law must be applied uniformly. This segment drives home the importance of justice being blind and underscores the human side of fraud investigations.
their tracks. Well, before I go there, do you think those people should be prosecuted?
I think if there is reason to pursue prosecution, of course they should be prosecuted.
Okay. Do you
and
think
convicted.
their ethnicity should matter?
The ethnicity of these people
The thieves.
should not matter.
Okay.
Not a bit.
Now, some of these thieves also went to some restaurants and said, I need a fictitious invoice that you fed 100 people. You're not going to feed 100 people. You're just going to help me steal the money, and I'll kick back some of the money to you. Do you think those restaurant thieves should be prosecuted?
I think if they have committed crimes, they should be prosecuted.
Regardless of their ethnicity?
Regardless of their ethnicity.
Okay. You had some other people in Minnesota who had a different scam. They went to the Medicaid department and said, I need state taxpayer money and federal taxpayer money to provide services to autistic children. And they got the money. And then to maximize the fruits of their theft, they went to well, first, do you think those people who's
Same answer to the question.
Okay. Now, in order to generate more money they could steal, they went to some families and said, do you have children? And some of the families said, yeah, we have kids. And they said, the thieves said, are your children autistic? And they said, well, no. And the thief said, well, would you agree to sign paperwork to say they're autistic if we kick back to you some of the money? Do you think those families should be prosecuted?
Same answer.
Okay. And you don't think their ethnicity should matter?
Not a bit.
Okay. All right, is it Hankerson?
Hankinson, yes, sir.
I'm sorry, Mr. Hankinson. Did I understand you to say that you have studied immigrant communities throughout the United States in terms of fraud levels on social services?
Not specifically, no. I've done visa interviews in many countries, tens of thousands of them, and I've looked at reports about fraud levels.
I misunderstood you. I'm sorry about that. It's been a long day. Mr. Beyer, am I saying your name right?
It's Mr. Beer.
Mr. Beer. I like beer better.
Most people do.
Tell me that, I think I heard you say that some people, some folks who've come to our country and are trying to get status to stay, have applied to the Department of Health of DHS, and they've paid money, and DHS is doing nothing?
Oh, that's right. Yep, they're sitting on their applications, not processing them.
That's a pretty bold statement. How many people? I'm not saying you're wrong. I don't know. How many people we're talking about?
About half of the immigrant flow right now.
So
90 countries are affected by the State Department ban.
How many people is that?
Well, it's at least 300,000 abroad and probably twice that when you consider the people already in the U.S.
So you're saying that 300,000 folks have gone to DHS to seek some kind of permanent status or semi-permanent status to stay. At least 300,000.
Immigrant vetting and visa processing delays are another front in this story. Tens of thousands of applications sit unprocessed, creating opportunities for fraud. Experts note that for countries with poor documentation, the risk skyrockets. The takeaway? A robust vetting system isn't just bureaucratic red tape. It's a national security and fraud prevention tool. If in doubt, don't issue. A simple principle with enormous consequences.
At least 300,000, and they paid money to DHS, and DHS has done nothing. Is that what?
That's right. Yeah, they're sitting on their applications.
Well,
or
who at DHS is
putting
doing
them in the
this?
trash.
Who at DHS is doing this?
Oh, it's Joseph Edlow. He's
Who
in
is
charge of it.
Edlow?
He came up with this policy to just.
Who is he?
He's the head of USCIS. Joseph Edlow is the head of USCIS. He came up with this
He's
policy
at DHS?
where he is just.
Slow down a minute, man.
he's
You've
just-
had too much coffee. Is he he's at DHS?
I'm just from New Jersey. So.
I understand. Great state, too. Who does he report to?
Secretary Noem, of course.
Okay. Does Secretary Noem know whether this...
I don't know what Secretary Noem knows, but she's aware of the general tenor of this administration.
What's his name?
Joseph Edlow.
Mr. Edlow. Who's his boss?
Secretary Noem.
Oh, okay. And you can document all this?
Oh, absolutely. They put out a memorandum saying we're not processing these people, and Secretary Rubio's involved as well when it comes to the State Department.
Would you send me that memo, please?
I will absolutely send that to you.
I went way over. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, John.
I appreciate that.
Senator Kennedy, I'm informed that USCIS is slowing adjudication because of the huge backlog and the lack of vetting of these migrants during the Biden administration is the reason that we've been given.
Yeah, I don't know. I just heard Mr. Beer, and I'm going to say he's right or wrong. Those are pretty bold allegations that they're taking the money and they're not doing anything, and I just want to know if it's true or not.
Well, they're making sure that these people are vetted so we don't end up with people like the National Guards woman here in Washington, D.C. that was killed by an African.
I don't have a problem with vetting. I just want to know whether what the witness is saying is true. No,
they're not adjudicating them. They're not.
When you don't fully vet individuals who are entering the United States, how can that, or how does that ultimately lead to fraud? And how can future administrations make sure that we are fully vetting and that we're actually, crossing every T and dotting every I? And what is the end result of that?
Well, I think the idea of fully vetting is a bit of a myth because if you have, say, an immigrant visa applicant from Germany where they have excellent records, they share them with us, and you have that person's identity and civil documents that are trustworthy, you can be pretty sure that person is who they say they are. Excellent. If they don't have a record, they don't have a record. If you have an applicant from Somalia or from Mali or somewhere that has much worse records, then you're much less likely to have an accurate result. And in some countries that I've worked, you have people who have marriages that are testified to only by villagers who are illiterate. So they've maybe had a statement printed out for them that they've signed with a thumbprint. That's not really something you can rely on. And then often criminal records are in places like Afghanistan just simply aren't recorded. Everybody in the village knows, but unless you can go there to check, you have no way of knowing.
So how can we better, how can our system be better to prevent fraud in the future, visa fraud in the future?
Well, from my perspective, if in doubt, you don't issue. You want to make sure that you know who it is, that they are who they say they are, and that they don't have a criminal record or any other ineligibility. And if you can't be sure, then you simply just don't issue that person a document.
And Mr. Linderman, do you have anything to add to that?
Thank you, Senator. In my remarks, I emphasize that State Department actually keeps country by country fraud summaries on the encounters that they meet in that country. This is an unclassified document in which you will find for Somalia, Nigeria, name the Mexico, name the country, a collection, a very deep dive into corrupt practices, fraudulent documents, and other information in which American diplomats, consular officers encounter fraud. And this is a valuable tool so that you can actually make some intelligent judgments. Countries in which fraud practices are widespread, when those nationals come to our country, it is only logical to believe that in many cases they may continue those practices. And so I would say this is not a judgment based on race, ethnicity, or whatever. It's based on facts. And consular officers keep very good records, as my colleague, Mr. Simonson, just mentioned. And when there is doubt, visas should not be issued. But there is a holistic approach that we can do as well. We can turn to a government in which a foreign government, in which it basically condones corrupt practices and say, we will hold you responsible for this, foreign government. We will stop adjudicating visas in your country until you clean up your own documents, you clean up your other corrupt practices.
Yeah, demand better. Let me ask real quick, Mr. O'Brien, we've discussed the topic a lot, particularly in the last couple of weeks, about sanctuary cities. And it is my belief that sanctuary city policies are ruining America, and that both we can keep our law enforcement officers safe and we can keep our American citizens safe by cooperation on the state, local, and federal level. And that cooperation, I think, is incredibly important, and I've long thought that we should defund sanctuary cities. Obviously, there's a public safety risk, which I have just hit on, but can you discuss how those same policies enable individuals to actually defraud American taxpayers?
Sure. I mean, the whole point of sanctuary cities is essentially for those jurisdictions to exempt themselves from federal immigration laws that they don't like. So they become a major magnet for people who are trying to evade the laws and are trying to commit fraud. And I think one of the things that is perhaps not necessarily digested by the American public is that if you are here illegally, you have to commit fraud in order to accomplish anything in the United States, because you can't work without appropriate documentation. You can't open a bank account. You can't operate a motor vehicle. And so all of these places, in refusing to cooperate with federal law enforcement in order to remove immigration violators, make themselves preferred locations for committing fraud, because they're magnets for people who are trying to evade enforcement by engaging in fraudulent activities.
For more content like this, stay tuned to Congress Clips, and thanks for watching.
From Minnesota welfare fraud to visa vetting challenges, today's hearing reveals the scale of systemic vulnerabilities in public programs and immigration enforcement. Accountability, oversight, and enforcement are key, and political and ethical stakes are enormous. If you found this political breakdown as intense as we did, hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life political commentary and analysis.